I worked station security for 12 cycles. But in just 3 seconds, one human woman taught me what a death world really means. I've been on Harmony Point for 12 cycles now, and I thought I'd seen everything, every species, every dispute, every type of foolishness sapient beings can invent when they're far from home and feeling bold. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the day I saw 7 Korean enforcers surrounding a single human female and finally understood the true meaning of Deathworld. My name is Kelif, and I am a Valian. That means I have 4 arms, excellent peripheral vision, and a natural ability to read body language across roughly 70% of known sapient species. These traits make me very effective at my job. Station security on Harmony Point isn't glamorous, but it's steady, pays well, and most importantly, it's predictable. Harmony Point sits at the junction of 3 major trade routes, so we get all sorts of visitors. Talaxians with crystalline exoskeletons who complain constantly about temperature. Gourmet merchants who smell like fermented fruit and push items you definitely don't need. Pelian diplomats speaking in the third person and treating direct eye contact as an act of war. Yeltran pleasure seekers looking for entertainment. Korthians looking for fights. You quickly learn to spot trouble before it starts. You learn which species clash, and when to intervene, or when it's better to let things play out. I had a partner named Ven, a 2-meter-tall Dracian whose scales shifted color with his mood. Right now, they were calm blue-green, signaling a normal day. We patrolled the commercial district as usual, past the food stalls for oxygen breathers, the liquid nitrogen bar for corrections, and the gravity-adjusted zones for species sensitive to standard settings. That's when the alert came in: human transport vessel docking at Bay 7. Estimated passengers, 43. Ven's scales flickered yellow, curiosity. Deathworlders, he said, the word tasting strange on his tongue. I shrugged with 2 of my arms. They're harmless enough. Loud? Yes. Overly friendly? Absolutely. But the reports say they're more focused on trade and tourism than causing trouble. Mostly, this was true. Humans had joined the Galactic Collective 8 cycles ago and had been spreading enthusiastically ever since. They bought and sold, asked endless questions, took pictures of everything, and had this odd habit of trying to pet animals that could easily kill them. Violent? Not really. Annoying? Frequently. Dangerous statistically? No. They come from a Class 12 death world, Ven said, now showing orange streaks. Concern. Gravity 1.3 times standard. Toxic atmosphere that they somehow breathe. Megapona that actively hunt sapiens. Weather that drops frozen water from the sky. Yes, I've read the files, I said, waving one hand dismissively. But being from a death world doesn't automatically make them dangerous. The Krell come from a Class 11 world and they're pacifist poets. Ven clicked, a sound meaning he wasn't fully convinced, but he let it go. We watched the docking bay monitors as the human ship settled into position. The airlock cycled, and then they came out. Humans, dozens of them, moving in clusters, talking, laughing, pointing at displays, taking images, dressed in clothing of every possible color. They were bipedal, which was nothing unusual. Bilateral symmetry was also common. Still, there was something distinctive in how they moved, smooth and controlled, like compressed energy held in place by synthetic fabric and polite intent. See? I said to Van. Completely harmless. He did not answer. His scales had faded to gray, a sign he was thinking deeply. I should have paid closer attention to that. The call arrived roughly 2 hours after the human vessel docked. A disturbance had been reported at the Tven trading post, level 3, commercial sector. Raised voices, possible escalation. Routine. Van and I headed over at an unhurried pace, expecting the usual situation: someone charged too much, someone felt insulted, someone misinterpreted a glance. The standard performance everyone puts on before life continues as normal. What we encountered was not routine. The Tven trading post specialized in what they officially described as salvage, and what most others correctly identified as stolen goods with conveniently erased origins. The owner, a Trill named Crix, had 6 eyes and an impressive ability to invent prices on the spot. Standing at his counter was a human female, approximately 1.7 meters tall. She had dark hair secured in a practical knot and wore functional clothing, dark trousers, a fitted jacket, and a shirt with text I could not read from where I stood. In one hand, she held a compact data device, which she used to indicate Crix's display screen. "I'm telling you," she said, her voice carrying that particular human accent that sharpened certain syllables, "this component is worth about 200 credits on any civilized station. You're trying to charge me 800. That's not a markup. That's theft with documentation." Crix's eyes rotated independently, a common reaction when a Trill merchant feels cornered. "Human customer does not understand rarity," he replied. Component very difficult to obtain. Very dangerous. Price is reasonable. The price is absurd, the human responded. Her tone was steady, too steady. The tone of someone who had had this discussion many times and already knew the outcome. I can buy this exact part from at least 3 other vendors on this station for under 300. I'm offering you the chance to compete. That was when the Corthians arrived. For context, Corthians serve as the physical enforcement arm of the Midrim territories. They stand around 2.5 meters tall, covered in dense gray hide capable of deflecting most light weapons. Their arms resemble industrial loading machinery, and their culture prioritizes strength and intimidation above nearly everything else. They work as enforcers, guards, and, on occasion, unofficial conflict resolvers, which is simply another way of saying they injure others for payment. 7 of them pushed through the growing crowd. 7, because Crix had apparently decided this disagreement justified professional coercion and had summoned his security contractors. The lead Corthian bore ritual scars across his face, markings that indicated he had killed no fewer than 12 sentient beings in sanctioned combat. He looked down at the human woman. "You leave now," he said. "Merchant says you cause problem. We remove problems." The crowd, previously just curious, became fully attentive. Various species stepped back, creating space around the Corthians. This was a sensible reaction. When Corthians decide to remove someone, the process is rarely careful and often results in structural damage. The human woman, identified by her visitor tag as Mara Quinn, did not retreat. She looked up at the lead Corthian. Then, slowly and deliberately, she examined each of the remaining 6. Her expression remained unchanged. Her breathing stayed even. She regarded them the way one might view a familiar calculation, already solved, mildly inconvenient. "I'm discussing pricing with the merchant," she said. "If you'd like to wait your turn, that's fine. Otherwise, I recommend finding something more productive to do." Van's scales flashed bright red. Alarm. The surrounding noise dropped away. The Corthians began to reposition, spreading out to encircle her in a loose formation. It was a standard intimidation tactic: restrict exits, isolate the target, and apply pressure through sheer presence. Mara Quinn stood completely still. She did not appear cornered. She looked as if she were waiting for something to happen. That was when a cold realization settled in my gut: she was waiting for them to make an error. I said quietly, "We need to step in right now." But by then, the moment had already slipped past us. We forced our way through the gathering crowd, and I activated my authority projector, amplifying my voice across the trading post floor. "Galactic security. Everyone take 3 steps back. Corian contractors, you are unlawfully obstructing free movement. Disperse immediately." The lead Corian did not acknowledge me. His gaze remained fixed on Mara. "This is a private security issue," he said. "Station authority is not required. We will handle it." "That is not how jurisdiction functions," I replied, moving closer. He shifted position, partially flanking me. His scales began flashing red and orange, Dracian body language that clearly signals danger to anyone who understands it. "You are on a galactic collective station," I said evenly. "All disputes fall under our authority. Step back and allow us to mediate." By then, 3 Corians had positioned themselves behind Mara. The remaining 4 formed a barrier in front of her and along her sides. They were armed. I could see shock batons on their belts, restraint fields, and likely concealed blades. Corians always carried knives. No weapons had been drawn yet, but the intent was unmistakable. This was their standard procedure: surround, intimidate, escalate if needed. They had repeated this process countless times. The crowd continued to swell. I noticed Thaxians recording on personal devices. A cluster of Pelion traders observed from behind a support column. 2 Gurmith were openly placing bets, as expected. And at the center of it all stood Mara Quinn, completely unmoving. That was the first detail that truly registered. She had not adjusted her stance, had not searched for an escape route, had not displayed any of the typical fear responses common to prey species when encircled by predators. Her arms rested loosely at her sides. Her shoulders were relaxed. Her head remained level. Only her eyes moved. I have 4 eyes, positioned to provide nearly 300 degrees of vision, and I constantly track multiple threats. Mara had only 2, forward-facing in a predator configuration, yet she was somehow monitoring all 7 Corians at once. I watched her pupils make subtle shifts, left, right, then back again, and understood what she was doing. She was constructing a threat map, mentally cataloging positions, weapons, reach, and likely attack paths. This was not a civilian in over her head. This was a trained combatant evaluating tactical options. "Listen," I said, keeping my tone controlled. "No one needs to be harmed. This is a commercial disagreement over a component worth a few hundred credits. Let's behave rationally and resolve this through the proper channels. The lead Korean finally looked at me, and I saw the decision in his eyes. He had already made up his mind. The human had disrespected his employer. She had refused to back down in the face of superior force. And now she was making him appear weak in front of witnesses. In Korean culture, such a situation demanded a response, usually a physical one. Deathworlder needs a lesson, he said. Needs to understand how things work in civilized space. We teach station security. Can file report afterward. That's not going to happen. Then his voice dropped into the subsonic tone directions used when genuinely angry. One of the Koreans behind Mara laughed. It was an unpleasant sound. 7-2. You want a piece of this? We have enough for everyone. I began calculating our options. Calling for backup would take at least 3 minutes. Physically intervening was risky. Korthians outmatched us. While I knew restraint techniques, I wasn't trained to take on 7 at once. Threatening them with legal consequences was useless. They clearly didn't care. Then I noticed something about Mara. Her breathing hadn't changed at all. Her chest rose and fell at the same steady rhythm as when we arrived, no acceleration, no signs of stress. I had seen this only once before, in a Thalaxian meditation master who had spent 40 years mastering control of his autonomic nervous system. But Mara was not meditating. She was waiting. Her weight shifted so subtly I almost missed it. Her left foot now sat half a step behind her right. Her knees unlocked. Her center of gravity dropped maybe 2 centimeters. Combat stance. She was in a combat stance. Wait, I said, raising both hands toward the Korthians. Everyone, just wait. The lead Korean reached for Mara's shoulder, and that's when everything went wrong. I need to be precise here, because when I filed my report, 3 separate supervisors accused me of exaggerating. But I have the security footage. I have Ven as a witness. I have roughly 50 bystanders who saw exactly what happened. And I have 7 Korean enforcers in the medical bay who will probably never take another contract on this station. It took 3 seconds. 3 seconds. The lead Korean's hand was maybe 10 centimeters from Mara's shoulder when she moved. And I mean she moved in a way my brain initially couldn't process. Humans come from a high-gravity world, 1.3 times standard, which means their muscles, reflexes, and overall biology are built for an environment that would exhaust most species in minutes of walking. On a standard gravity station like Harmony Point, humans operate at about 70% of their natural weight. Mara's right hand shot up and caught the Korean's wrist. I heard the bone snap from 5 meters away. It sounded like a cargo crate splitting. The Korean's face hadn't even registered surprise yet. Mara used his momentum and compromised balance to pivot, throwing a 2.5-meter tall mass of muscle and dense hide over her hip and into the Korean standing to her left. 2 down. 7 seconds elapsed. The Korean to her right reached for his shock baton, hand halfway to his belt, when Mara's boot struck his knee. A precise lateral hit that hyperextended the joint with a wet popping sound that made my stomach turn. He went down hard. Mara was already spinning, elbow arcing to catch another Korean in the throat. He choked and staggered backward, hands clutching at his crushed windpipe. 4 down. 1.4 seconds elapsed. The 3 Koreans behind her started moving forward. This is the part one still can't believe when I watch the security footage. Mara dropped low, almost kneeling, and swept the nearest one's legs. He went airborne, genuinely airborne, and landed on top of another Korean with enough force that both hit the deck and stayed down. 6 down. 2.1 seconds elapsed. The last Korean, who had watched his team dismantled in less time than a thought could form, finally freed his shock baton from his belt. He raised it, activating the charge, electricity arcing along its length. Mara stepped inside his reach, caught his arm, and used her hips and shoulders to flip him through the air. He rotated 180 degrees, inverted completely, and hit the floor flat on his back. The impact expelled all the air from his lungs with a sound like a pressure seal failing. The shock baton clattered across the floor, still sparking. 7 down. 3.0 seconds elapsed. Then the room went silent. Not quiet, silent, like someone cut the audio feed. Every conversation, transaction, and ambient sound stopped. Species from a dozen worlds, each with different cultural contexts, all reacted the same way in that exact moment. We had just witnessed apex predator behavior. Mara stood at the center of a circle of groaning, injured Koreans. Her breathing hadn't changed. She rolled her shoulders once, a subtle gesture that suggested she was loosening up, not winding down. Her eyes scanned the crowd, observing rather than threatening, ensuring no further issues needed attention. Then she looked at Crix, the Trollvan merchant who had started this mess. Her expression remained calm, patient, slightly annoyed, exactly as before. "So," she said, voice cutting through the silence like a hull breach, "are we negotiating a fair price, or are you going to keep wasting everyone's time?" RX-6 eyes were wide and fixed on her. 200 credits, he said quickly. "Very fair. Very reasonable. I package it for you now. No charge for the container." "That's what I thought," Mara said. She walked to his counter, stepping carefully around the Corians, and pulled out a credit sheet. The transaction processed with a cheerful beep that sounded absurd given the context. Crix handed her a small package, hands visibly shaking. "Thank you for shopping at Talvin Trading Post," he said, voice 3 octaves higher than usual. "Please come again. Discount for return customers." Mara took her package, tucked it into her jacket, and turned toward me. "And then ICERs," she said, nodding politely. "I assume you'll want a statement." I couldn't speak. My translator worked fine, my vocal cords were functional, but my brain decided forming words was beyond it. Then scales went pure white. I had never seen that color before. I didn't know directions could turn that shade. I finally managed to coordinate brain and mouth after what felt like an hour but was probably only 5 seconds. "Yes. A statement. Right? We need a statement. And medical teams, several of them. Definitely a formal incident report as well." Mara reached into her jacket and pulled out an identification card, the type with embedded verification chips that are nearly impossible to forge. She handed it to me with the same casual energy someone might use when returning a borrowed datapad. Mara Quinn, registered security contractor, licensed in 47 collective systems, including this one. Self-defense clause applies when threatened by multiple armed hostiles. I am happy to cooperate fully with your investigation. I looked at the card. It was legitimate. Completely legitimate. It included credentials from the Collective Security Licensing Board, weapon certifications, combat training records, and even a commendation from the Draxian Merchant Guild for defending a convoy from pirates. "You're a security contractor," I said. Apparently my brain had decided to state only the obvious. "Yes. You just disabled 7 Korean enforcers in 3 seconds. 3.2 seconds, actually," she corrected. "But yes, approximately. Bare hands." "Well, and my feet," Mara added. "And 1 elbow strike. Proper self-defense uses your whole body as a weapon system." Behind me, a sound like a slowly deflating atmosphere regulator came from the Koreans. Medical teams were arriving, loading the injured onto stretchers. The one with the broken wrist was conscious and whimpering. The one thrown to the ground stared at the ceiling, clearly reconsidering life choices. The one with the crushed throat would need serious reconstructive work. The crowd was still watching, but the atmosphere had shifted. Mara's fellow humans, from her transport ship, weren't surprised at all. Several were smiling. One was even laughing. A tall human male with graying hair pushed through the crowd and approached Mara. "Nice form," he said. "That last throw, you had at least another meter of airtime." "I didn't want to crack the deck plating," Mara replied. "Station maintenance gets annoyed when that happens." "Fair point." Another human, a woman with bright blue hair defying several laws of biology, pointed at Mara and then at me. "You should have read the shirt," she said, still grinning. "The shirt?" I asked. She pointed again. I looked. Mara's shirt, under her jacket, had words printed in clear galactic standard. "Death Boxing Champion." "Boxing?" I said slowly. "That's a human combat sport," the blue-haired woman said cheerfully. "One of many. Mara holds titles in 3 weight classes. You should see her in the ring." This was her being gentle. This, what you just saw, was gentle. I excused myself, told Mara we'd need her for a formal statement at the security office, and calmly walked to the nearest duty station to access the security footage. Kelleth followed, his scales still white. I pulled up the video and set it to quarter speed. At that speed, I could see the precision of each strike. The broken wrist targeted a compliance point where Korean bone structure is weakest. The knee strike hyperextended without breaking the joint. The elbow to the throat disabled without being lethal. The throws used leverage and momentum rather than brute force. The leg sweep avoided head impact. She had neutralized 7 armed hostiles in 3 seconds without causing a single fatal injury. It was like a math problem: input, violence, output, controlled neutralization of threats with minimal lasting damage. Kelleth spoke quietly, his voice shaking. "What else do humans do, for fun?" I pulled up a search query on human combat sports: boxing, kickboxing, wrestling, and something called mixed martial arts, which combined many techniques. Judo, karate, Muay Thai, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Krav Maga, the list went on endlessly. "They fight each other," I said, my stomach sinking. Entire industries exist for humans to watch others fight, and they pay for it. Then they go home and practice the same techniques. Why? Van asked. I had no answer. I spent the next hour conducting research while Mara provided her statement to the incident documentation team. With each search query I ran, my understanding of humans shifted, from curiosity to concern, and finally to genuine alarm. Humans have been engaging in organized combat with rules, referees, and paying spectators for thousands of years. Thousands. They have structured fighting traditions dating back to ancient civilizations. They train their children in combat, viewing it as both exercise and character building. Every human world and colony has schools and training facilities dedicated to this. I came across footage of human boxing matches, two humans wearing padded gloves, standing in a marked square, repeatedly striking each other in the head and torso until one could no longer continue. Audiences cheered. Tickets were sold. Championship belts, prize money, and corporate sponsorships were all part of the spectacle. Then I discovered mixed martial arts. That was even more extreme. Humans would grapple on the ground, applying joint locks and chokeholds, striking with fists, elbows, knees, and feet. I watched one human bend another's arm backward until it broke. The injured human did not scream but tapped the ground twice to indicate submission. Then, astonishingly, they stood and hugged each other. They hugged after deliberately breaking an arm, for sport. I said, "Are you seeing this?" Then watched over my shoulder as Keltha's scales flickered in colors I had never seen before. "This is what they do to each other, to their own species, for recreation," I said. "Fair," I continued, reading further. "Humans have weight classes to ensure fights are balanced. They also regulate which techniques are too dangerous to use." "Too dangerous?" Kelth asked. I scrolled through the rules: eye gouging, groin strikes in some formats, biting, strikes to the spine or back of the head, small joint manipulation. Everything else was apparently allowed. We sat in silence for a while, watching a highlight reel of knockout victories, humans striking each other so hard the brain temporarily shuts down. Kelth said slowly, "Mara did none of that to the Corthians. She didn't strike anyone in the head with full force. She didn't break an arm, only a wrist. She controlled their falls. She could have killed them all in those 3 seconds, and she chose not to." He was right. I rewatched the security footage, this time focusing on what Mara didn't do. She had countless opportunities to target vulnerable areas: throats, temples, spines. Instead, she focused on limbs and used throws designed to disable rather than kill. She had held back significantly. My personal comm unit chimed with a message from the medical bay. I opened it and immediately regretted it. All 7 Corthians were stable, 2 with broken bones, 1 with a hyperextended knee, multiple contusions, and 1 suffering from severe bruised pride. They were also traumatized. The report used that exact word. The lead Corthian, with a broken wrist and ritual scars marking 12 formal kills, requested immediate psychological counseling and refused to leave his bed. 3 others had already submitted emergency transport requests, willing to pay breach of contract penalties and forfeit wages just to leave. 1 vowed never to take another contract involving humans. Another asked if any stations in collective space prohibited human visitors. The medical officer added a personal note: in 20 years of trauma medicine, they had never seen Corthian enforcers this shaken. They recommended updating station security threat protocols regarding human civilians. Meanwhile, my comm unit continued chiming, messages flooded in. The incident was spreading through station gossip channels faster than a hull breach. I had seen at least 30 different video recordings from multiple angles, all showing the same 3-second event. Someone had already added music. Another person had made a slow-motion analysis with commentary. The Pelion diplomatic delegation had formally asked whether humans were correctly classified as a Class 12 species, or if the collective had made a mistake. A Salesian journalist wanted an interview with Mara the Gurmath, who had been the subject of numerous bets. Some were even debating whether the result counted as valid, since no one had expected it to end in under 5 seconds. Then I asked, "How do we write this report?" His scales had dulled to a gray resignation. "Very carefully," he replied. "Very, very carefully." Writing the incident report took 4 hours. I rewrote it 6 times because every version seemed completely absurd. Attempt 1 made it sound like I was exaggerating. Attempt 2 implied the Koreans were incompetent. Attempt 3 suggested Mara had used illegal weapons or enhancements. Attempt 4 simply said, "See attached video footage for all questions," which my supervisor rejected. Attempt 5 tried to use technical combat terms I had learned, but I used them incorrectly and accidentally described Mara performing a maneuver that required 4 arms. Attempt 6 was the one I finally submitted. It clearly stated the facts, included timestamps, referenced Mara's verified credentials, attached full security footage from 4 angles, and contained witness statements from 17 different species, all confirming the same impossible sequence of events. I added one personal note: recommend updating station threat assessment guidelines to treat human civilians with combat training the same as, or even more cautiously than, armed Korean enforcers. My supervisor approved it with a single comment: agreed. Also, what in the name of the founders are they teaching people on that planet? Before Mara left the station, I found her in the departure lounge, sitting with a group of other humans and drinking something that smelled toxic. Coffee, according to the label, a stimulant that would likely put most species in the medical bay, but humans apparently drank it multiple times a day. Miss Quinn, I said, approaching carefully, making sure all 4 of my hands were visible and non-threatening. I wanted to thank you for your cooperation with the investigation. Everything has been cleared. The self-defense ruling was unanimous. Good, she said, smiling. It was a friendly smile, which somehow made it worse because now I knew exactly what she was capable of, and she was being pleasant about it. No hard feelings, I hope. I realized this must have created a lot of paperwork. Some paperwork, I said, an understatement of cosmic proportions. Can I ask you something off the record? She said. Sure. That whole situation with the 7 Koreans, was that difficult for you? Mara laughed. Difficult? No, not really. A little workout, maybe. Honestly, it was nothing compared to rush hour on Earth. You ever try to get on a subway in New Shanghai during peak time? That requires combat skills. She said it jokingly, but I had done my research. I knew Earth cities had tens of millions of people packed into small areas. I knew humans competed for space on public transportation, twice daily, every day, as part of their routine. You're saying your daily commute is more dangerous than fighting 7 armed enforcers? I asked. More chaotic, she said. Anyway, enforcers follow predictable attack patterns. Commuters are wild cards, they're just trying to get to work on time, which is a motivation you can't defend against. The other humans nodded, treating this as completely normal. Well, I said, unable to think of anything else. I hope the rest of your visit to Harmony Point is less eventful. Me too, Mara said. I had just wanted to buy a ship component. Maybe grab some food that wasn't recycled protein paste. Simple vacation errands. She finished her bitter coffee, stood up, and shook my hand. Her grip was deliberately friendly rather than intimidating, but it still made my bones creak. Then she headed toward her departure gate with the rest of her group. I watched them leave. A group of bipedal Deathworlders who fought each other for sport, drank poison for breakfast, considered pushing through crowds of their own species twice a day completely normal, and yet, they were simultaneously some of the friendliest tourists the collective had ever hosted. Van appeared beside me, his scales a reflective shade of purple. So, he said, what did we learn today? I paused, thinking about Mara's composed expression, the way she dismantled 7 trained fighters in 3 seconds, the boxing championship shirt she wore, and the claim that rush hour on Earth was considered more dangerous than actual combat. We learned, I said slowly, that humans can be extremely kind right up until the moment they're not, and that the shift between those states happens faster than most species can perceive, let alone react to. Anything else? Yes. Never underestimate them. Under no circumstances should you threaten a human. And if you ever find it unavoidable, make sure to check their clothing first. The scales shimmered with what might have been amusement. Practical advice, indeed. We stood there for a while, watching the departure board cycle through destinations. Human colonies were expanding rapidly across this sector, with more arrivals every cycle, friendly, curious, energetic, yet intimidating. I finally said, I think it's time to update my resume. Add a new skill. What skill? Reading human clothing to assess potential threats. He actually laughed at that, a sound like stones tumbling down a hillside. Somewhere in the distance, the next human transport requested docking clearance. I returned to,